Hey there, and welcome to Geopolitics 4-1. Today, of course, we are looking at one of the top African leaders at the moment, not elected via democracy, but a coup leader. But despite being a coup leader, everyone in Africa is looking at this guy as the savior of the world, or maybe the person who would come and liberate Africa to what we as Africans want it to be. So Ibrahim Traoré is facing a lot of attacks from the US, and this happened in the last, about a week ago. And this was between him and General Michael Langley of the US, who decided, you know what, we're going to attack this guy because maybe he has taken control and has put the Westerners out of Africa. But Africans, on the other hand, took to social media spaces to fight for Traore and say, you know what, this is the one man standing for Africa, and the whole of Africa stands behind him. So US General Michael Langley and the US received a huge backlash, criticism, following the remarks that he made against Burkina Faso's leader, Ibrahim Traoré. General Michael, who's the head of the United States Africa Command, which is commonly known as AFRICOM, accused Burkina Faso's president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, of misusing the country's gold reserves for personal protection rather than national benefit. Can you imagine? A president of a country is misusing their gold for personal interest and not for national. Yet the citizens of Burkina Faso are happy with the leadership of their leader. What comes of respect between two nations, I mean independent nations? That was quite something. And as an African, I mean, I was also against the general. So many Africans, of course, took to Twitter to voice their outrage, accusing the US of meddling in the sovereign affairs of African nations and displaying, I mean, this of course was a display of double standards in its foreign policy. Every country has a foreign policy which they operate in. So why would the US feel so entitled to come and give, you know, say how another African country which has a foreign policy that they operate on is not okay? Well, of course, for many Africans, question why the US remains silent, especially on the historic and ongoing exploitation of African resources by their multinational corporations and foreign governments, while suddenly they are raising concerns when an African leader asserts control over their wealth. I mean, these Westerners are the people that have caused war in Congo, Sudan, and these are countries where we know their minerals. And their companies are in charge, like most of the mining companies are Western companies, and they have destabilized these nations, not just now, this is historical. And then when one leader stands up for themselves and for the people, then this is the one person they want to attack. It was rather obvious. It's just application of double standards. So Traore came to power through a military-led transition in 2022 and has positioned himself as a defender of national sovereignty, drawing both support and scrutiny for his tough stance against foreign influence, especially from the former colonial powers and Western institutions. And key reason why people feel the US was just reacting out of pain in their hearts, or maybe because they do not have control of Burkina Faso anymore, is because Traore kicked out the French soldiers from Burkina Faso and closed their bases that were there. They had military bases in that nation. But he decided, you know what, time is done, we are done, we do not want any more of that. So that could have resulted to that. The other thing is that Traore is sort of leaning towards the Russian, you know, looking like he's befriending more of Russia and seems to be working better with Russia. And of course, this is not sitting well with the US. So the backlash is, of course, as a result of all these factors. And it's crystal clear that reflecting the growing resentment in many African nations over what is seen as paternalistic attitudes from the West. Critics, of course, argue that these remarks reinforce a narrative that African leaders cannot be trusted to govern or manage resources without external oversight. You know, like if an American believes only when they dictate what Traore can do is when they will be able to use the resources for national good. I mean, isn't that a way of just promoting neocolonialism in this century? So, of course, some people have linked Langley's role to that of a modern-day enforcer of the Western interest on the continent. And these comments were made, in fact, during a US Senate hearing where he was saying that these resources are diverted from national interests to personal interests. Of course, the question many, and personally even asked myself, is how much does the US spend on security? I went to Google, straight up, defense fiscal year for year 2020-25, which is this year. The budget request was $849.8 billion. So if the US can invest that, why is it that now I also Googled the Burkina Faso security budget, which stood at only $1.024 billion in 2024. So imagine if the US can spend $849 billion on security, why would Africa, or rather Burkina Faso, which wants to spend $1 billion in security and they're always fighting insurgents, not spend on their own security? Why would the US be so confident in having such a huge budget but question when Burkina Faso wants to have that? I mean, neocolonialism, if you ask me. So even after the backlash, General Langley and AFRICOM have not responded. Why? And meanwhile, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, the EFF of South Africa, which is led by General Malema, issued a very strong statement that rejected the US Senate allegations against Burkina Faso's president. And their official statement, which was posted on X, said, "We condemn the West's continued interference in African nations' affairs and their attempts to control our resources. The EFF supports Captain Traore's efforts to reclaim Burkina Faso's gold for the benefit of its people and to resist neocolonial pressures." Of course, the EFF described the allegations as part of a broader pattern of Western meddling African governance, warning that these narratives are designed to delegitimize leaders who reject foreign domination. So EFF, on the other hand, added that African countries must maintain the sovereign right to determine how their resources are utilized and without external interference. Of course, they even asked the other African leaders to, support Traore. But since then, I haven't seen any African leaders who has issued a statement in support of Traore or condemning the US for that. So that tells you the kind of leaders we have in Africa, and it questions, like, are they afraid to support one of their own, or is it a fear of they condemn this, then they will have, differences with the West? I mean, it's something we can only speculate. So that's what happened, and that's what happened between Burkina Faso and US. So the Burkinabe government also issued a statement that was condemning the general's remarks, and they said it was regrettable, gravely inaccurate, and warned that such statements not only distort the country's reality but also undermine the credibility of its leadership. They criticized the remarks from the general for making sweeping claims without any evidence and failing to acknowledge that Burkina Faso's evolving sovereign policy direction. So the government reaffirmed its commitment to fighting corruption, promoting transparency, and equitably distributing of national resources, asserting that these ongoing reforms reflect its dedication to serving the Burkinabe people. And you know what? Here from Kenya, when you speak to a lot of young people, even in our matatu culture, because matatu culture in Kenya is where they do a lot of artwork of leaders they admire, the president of Burkina Faso is now on so many matatus, and a lot of young people in Africa, even here in Kenya, they're looking forward to this guy and praising what he's doing for his country. So these are some of the things that are happening in Africa, and hopefully someday Africa will be able to stand up for itself and change how things are done. Thank you for watching. See you on the next episodes. The world is fast-paced and sometimes you miss the action. What perspectives do you have? What is the truth? Is the world at war? Join me, Sarah Mwangi, as we make sense of the information overload.